I would think we did have a summary. We had a business summary. It was maybe 6 pages. That was sufficient. I think I just know with a technology startup to put together a 180-page business plan isn't going to help you, because by the time you've written it, you it's like putting together a functional spec. By the time you've written the functional spec, you've realised that your product, you can see how to innovate your product. So I think we used the same kind of agile Scrum process that we used on developing the product as we did on the business plan as well. So.
I think as a general point, what you're trying to do for investors is to reduce the level of risk, or the perceived level of risk, which is why a management team, which we talked about, is so important, because that's one of the ways you can do it, by showing, say, if the team have got evidence of exits, that there's confidence that you will actually deliver those expectations. So if you've got the revenues sort of ramping up, 20-fold per year or whatever, if the team's done it before in another business, then there's more likelihood they're going to do it again. So you've really got to think carefully in the plan and in your discussions about how you can take that risk out for the investor. More so for a VC, but it's also relevant for angels as well.
So you are actually a bunch of risks coming towards the investor. You may well see the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, but you are also a load of risks that could possibly derail this. So the more of those things you can take out of the equation, show you've thought about them and got a plan to mitigate them, the better you are. So you need to show that you've thought about the risks and got a plan for dealing with them. So yes, you've got a business plan, you've got plan A, plan B, plan C, or at least indications of what you will do if circumstances change.
That's a really good point. I put together a what-if document. I think I maybe have 400 or 500 what-ifs. What if this happens? What if that happens? And they loved that. So.
I think your point about low burn rate, agility, in the first dot-com boom, people got huge amounts of money, spent it on fixed cost infrastructures, that then when inevitably your revenues are going to go to the right. If there's one thing that's likely to happen, not in accordance with your plan, is that your revenues will actually come in later than you think. Probably, was it you said 3 times later than you think? You take your estimates and then treble them. That applies to how long it's going to take to get traction, probably. So if you've got a big fixed cost infrastructure that's burning your cash or the investor's cash, the revenues aren't coming in, and you don't have anywhere else to go apart from back to your investors for more money, your valuation's going to go down, you'll have a down round, you're going to be over a barrel, it gets very uncomfortable. So plan B, to try to make sure that you're not running out of money and you're not solely dependent on your existing investors, is a very wise thing to think about before you start.
Can I ask Justin a question? We had Tom, who you didn't hear speak earlier on. He was advocating steer clear of VCs, stick with business angels because they invest in ordinary shares, so you have a nice simple deal, and at the end of the day everybody has the same percentage of the company at exit as when they did the deal. You've gone down the VC route, and by the sound of it, some complicated share structures which might skew the ownership more in the VC's direction than yours. How did you come to terms with all that, or did you just sort of ignore it and hope for the best?
No, I didn't ignore it, and I didn't hope for the best, but I still own the majority of the company. I was quite clever with how I raised the angel money. So I raised 50,000 for 5% of the business, which gave us a valuation of $1 million, and that was very strong. It's very strong to walk into the VC round with that, plus the traction that we'd proved also increased our value. We had 2 angels. We have 2 angels in our round, as well as 2 VCs and a business school. So it's not a typical structure. They have Series A preference shares. Part of the deal was that I also own. I have a set amount of Series A shares as well as ordinary shares. That was just from heavily reading and talking to others about the process. Quite a good mentor for me was Jamie Murray Wells, who was Glasses Direct. He's now, which fund he's with now? He's now an entrepreneur in residence, one of the VC funds. I can't remember the name. Yeah, you've got to be really, really tough with the cap table. You've also got to protect yourself. I had to revest part of my shares as well, because without kind of what I talked about earlier, basically they believe that myself and my co-founder can take the business forward. If we're not involved, then they don't see it happening, so we're quite heavily tied in. So part of that, the agreement was that we revest some of our shares, so we don't disappear. That was my only gripe, but I understood why. And at the end of the day, they're giving you money. So.
Fair enough. Any more questions from the audience? Yes, lady there.
You just talked about the venture capital investors. They care about they care about the risk of the business. So because they invest with other investors, money from other investors. So my question is, if your business comes from kind of emerging markets, so you have country risk, you have local risk, and in this case, do you think your business plan will be interested by any of this VC, or if it come from emerging markets, or if your business come from your idea, this idea, do you think you can still go to see a venture capital firm in London to ask them to invest, or is it very hard, or will it be very hard?
Emerging markets in the sense of overseas, or where? What kind of emerging market? I can put two interpretations on that.
For example, China.
Yeah.
Okay,
Foreign,
yes,
yeah.
fair enough. So you've got a business proposition which the main market would be in China, and is it possible to go to a venture capitalist with that kind of proposition?
Maybe your market will be in China, only your business will be that kind of you might bring some business from China to UK.
Yes, or yes, okay, from China to the UK. Yeah, I think my personal view is, yes, you could, but you need to pick your venture capitalists carefully and make sure right up front that they are interested in those kinds of propositions. And there are funds and venture capitalists who are interested in that, but a lot of them won't be, because they won't necessarily understand. It's not impossible, just pick them carefully, I think. Don't know whether you've got a view.
Again, I think it's all to do with the stage you're at as a business. You know, if you're still pre-revenue, still pre-product, then a lot of the VCs aren't investing in those very early stage businesses. So it's just really mapping out who is going to be the most appropriate investor for you. But you know, we keep hearing about BRIC. China's an exciting market. So obviously, if there's an opportunity to access that market, then people will invest.
But there are certain words, certain things that sound the risk alarm bells in investors' minds. So dealing with China would be one of them. And for example, if there's intellectual property angle, the thing that comes to most people's minds is, do the Chinese infrastructure, does it respect intellectual property and patents as we understand it? What's the risk of you being copied, for example? These are the first thoughts that come into your mind when you say China. And then there are the cultural differences between us, and how long do you have to spend to set up a trusting cultural relationship with China? In my past, we did business with Japan, and the rule of thumb was it would take you 2 years to set up a relationship with the Japanese where they would have sufficient confidence in us to do business with us, which meant that people had to spend 2 years travelling out to Japan. And I say people, that meant the top people in the company, because the Japanese wouldn't think you were serious unless it was your top people going out there. So you have to plan for that and cost it all in, and it takes time. The strategy, actually, I have to say, in that instance, to deal with that was this spin-out that I was involved with. We got one reference sale in the UK. This was for a piece of tangible, it was equipment, it was instrumentation. Sold the first one to Rolls-Royce. Having sold it to Rolls-Royce, which is a worldwide, well-known name, went off and sold it in America, because the Americans are probably the easiest early adopters in terms of taking on new technology that looks good. And while the revenues were coming in from the American market, spent 2 years in parallel working up the Japanese market. Then went to Japan, then came back to Europe, and I have to say the rest of the product line, the last place it was sold was the UK.